Okay, welcome back. Hope everyone's fed and watered. So it's lesson one, part two. So we've kind of done an overview of the course, done our introductions, done our little Blackboard tour. One other thing, I just sent out a quick announcement. I talked about supporting you guys both while you're here at school and also into your future careers. So to that end, we have a computer studies LinkedIn group. Right now we have over 250 members, so it includes faculty, current students, as well as many alumni. So we often post in here, so we get job opportunities. We post here. Sometimes we have discussion about industry, and it's also a way for you to stay connected with faculty members, your classmates, as you move into your career. So actually, I got a message on here from a student who graduated with honors back in 2015. He's working at a large application security company, but he's starting his own company, and he was looking for potentially a co-op student to hire to help him build out his new project. We've connected him with Georgian's Entrepreneurship Center for mentoring and maybe funding through the research department, and kind of all these things tend to get funneled through our computer studies LinkedIn group. So the link is here if you're interested. And like I said, you will see lots of job opportunities. Whenever we get them, we tend to post them here. So I can just go in and approve anybody who's interested. Welcome to the group. So stay plugged in, and all kinds of interesting stuff in there. So LinkedIn is kind of how we tend to stay in touch with students once you're no longer in school. You're not checking your college email anymore. LinkedIn lets us see where you're going, what are you doing out in your careers. All right, so let's jump into first class. So kind of done our introduction. I will go through and respond to the rest of the discussion board postings. We've gone over our expectation of the course. So every week I'll outline what are the objectives. We'll have some learning activities. Sometimes there'll be some PowerPoint slides. I don't use tons of PowerPoint, and when we do, they'll be brief, and it's there for reference. I don't want to beat you over the head with it. And then there's a checklist telling you what you need to do before next week, next Monday at 5 p.m. Here are all the things you should have done. So we're going to do a little kind of collaborative whiteboarding activity here. So in lesson one, actually I need to do one thing first. Just go groups. Pete. Okay, I'm going to put everybody in a group on Blackboard. So I will create a role. And we'll use these groups for a few activities in class. So we are going to have 5 groups. Okay, so I think you should have a group link somewhere here on Blackboard. Just go into the student mode. Okay, so interesting. If we go into tools, and groups, I think you should be able to see what group you're in. You can see it in the main menu. Okay, thank you, Alex. Great. So I don't see group as an instructor, but you should see groups here. So go and check what group you are in. Everybody will be in group 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. So there's this link here to this cool little website called Miro. Miro is like a collaborative whiteboard. So open up this link. It'll take you here. So I've got 5 questions here, and you can zoom in or out. You can move this around. So if you're in group 1, I'm going to give you a few minutes to do a little searching online. And if you're in group 1, I want you to add underneath question 1, add a yellow sticky note. and then put your name on it. So if you are in group 1 on Blackboard, your question is, why learn ASP.NET? If you're in group 2, use a green sticky note, put your answer under here. If you're in group 3, your question is, what is MVC? Question 4, question 5. So I'm going to pause our recording. Yeah, no problem, Marwa. Yeah, it will be uploaded to YouTube. When you're done, we'll see you next week. So put a sticky note on, take a few minutes to answer the question, put it in the right color under your answer. Okay, I will pause the recording. So I'm going to resume my recording. As I said, I do like to leave a few slides up on Blackboard, and these slides are here in the week 1 folder so that you have them as a reference. You can refer to them when you do the review quiz. So you can typically find them here. So this file, the lesson 1 slides, it's just, think I've only got 9 slides. So the technology is mature, 20 years old now. And it evolved from an old technology called active server pages. So those files had ASP extensions, and the server-side code was written in VB script, so a form of VB, and it was very similar to PHP. And then that was Microsoft's web platform for a number of years. And in 2002, Microsoft came out with ASP.NET with a few goals. And we've touched on some of them. One of them was better performance and better security. And one of the ways that we do this is ASP.NET was one of the first compiled web frameworks. So language like PHP, our code is interpreted line by line on the web server. That's slow. Whereas we can compile ASP.NET code down to a binary, to ones and zeros. It's going to be more secure. It's going to run much faster. I think, as was it Fatima mentioned, yeah, she mentioned OOP. That's right. Also, before .NET came along, there weren't many platforms that allowed you to write object-oriented code for the web. It was mostly just, procedural scripting language. It also allowed us to have a single code base and build an app for both web and desktop with one code base, which was not common before .NET came along. They added MVC in 2008. Microsoft didn't create MVC. It's a style of, it's an architecture pattern that's become very widely used on many platforms today. And in 2016, 5 years ago, they developed .NET Core, which, as many people mentioned, it's open source, it's cross-platform, it's used for both web and API development, and that's become the new standard. Like I said, I've been using that in this class since 2018. By and large, the main audience for ASP.NET is medium and large enterprises. So you see it a lot in large corporations, a lot of government organizations. We'll see a lot of .NET development. Doesn't mean it can't be used for small applications. It absolutely can be. And it offers us as developers a lot of benefits over some of the other web development stacks. One is the code compilation. So as we already mentioned, it means our apps are more secure, they run faster. We get to develop with Visual Studio, which has this huge library of tools that we can literally plug in. So a lot of things that you did manually in your PHP course in semester 2, a lot of those things we can just kind of plug a module in Visual Studio. Who was your teacher for PHP? Probably many of you may have had Jeremy, Sean. Oh, maybe had Sean. Yeah, I mean, Sean's a rock star. Sean is a former student of mine. I mentioned former students that come back and teach. Yeah, Sean and Jess and Albert. I taught them all. They were all students. I know Albert. I remember Albert taking this class. And both Sean and Jess graduated in 2013. They were in the same class in the web development program. Yeah, they're rock stars. Awesome people, great teachers. There's lots of automation built into Visual Studio. So many things that we had to do manually in other platforms, we can do automatically with Visual Studio. We can use the MVC pattern. We'll dive into that in a minute. And then we've got these great integrations that a lot of you mentioned already in our whiteboard. SQL Server, Azure Cloud, GitHub for version control. Microsoft now owns GitHub, so that works even better than it already did. Somebody, I think it was Scott, who asked, it's way back up in the chat, somebody asked about authentication. So yes, ASP.NET has this very robust set of tools for managing security, right? And we'll use some of these things, but lots of pre-built components that make our life easier in terms of properly securing our applications. So we'll get into that in lesson 6 and lesson 8. Okay. Visual Studio is awesome. You guys have already worked with it. One of the awesome things about Visual Studio is we have runtime debugging for web applications. I know you're used to doing runtime debugging with desktop C# or your desktop Java applications, but you can't really do it effectively in PHP. Like launch a website and then watch the code execute one line at a time. We can do this with ASP.NET. We've actually been able to do it for 20 years. So you can inspect your variables, you can see your code path of your server-side script at runtime while the page is executing in the browser. This makes debugging incredibly easy and powerful. It has all kinds of project templates, so we can create an existing solution right out of the box and then customize it. And we'll be working mostly with the web with MVC template, and then our last lesson with our API template. Yeah, Jesse, it's with Visual Studio, we're going to do it today. You literally press play. It launches the website in debug mode. You can put breakpoints in, and your breakpoints are going to get hit. We'll look at it before we go today. Super easy. It really is. I like to say learning PHP is like learning how to ride a tricycle, and learning ASP.NET is like learning how to ride a Kawasaki motorcycle, right? We teach you how to ride the tricycle first to learn the basics. We can't put the motorcycle can't put you under the motorcycle right away, right? You got to learn how to ride the tricycle, learn how to ride a bicycle. It's got all kinds of UI components, so it will come with things like Bootstrap and jQuery and a layout template already given to us. It has all of these hooks for security built in. We have a package manager for adding third-party components, some from Microsoft, some from other developers. We can do unit testing, which we'll do later in the term, and version control is really nicely integrated. So working with Git, we can do it all right within Visual Studio. Okay, I'm just going to check my Miro board if any other notes about MVC. Mechanism to create web applications. True, Bina, but it's actually more than that. So let's have a quick look at how MVC works. So we've got 3 main components with MVC, and you're going to work with it probably in your JavaScript frameworks class as well. So we've got models, views, and controllers. So does anybody have any idea, like, what are these things? What is a model? What is a view? What is a controller? And how do they work? Anybody want to take a stab at it? Okay, so the model, as Jesse and Themis, yeah, it represents the data. So let's say we have a like a customer's table in the database, we're going to have a customer model that's like a class, and that class is going to have all the properties of a customer, first name string, last name string. So our models in MVC, they're very similar to the kinds of classes you would have built with Jarrett in your Intro to Objects class. And Liz and Alex said that, yeah, the views represent the UI. So this is not specifically only for web. We can use MVC for mobile, for desktop. This could be a series of Android activities, or it could be a series of HTML files in a web application, depends on what kind of platform we're on. And the controller, Tima said, it's an interface. It has access to the data. Yeah, the controller is like the messenger in between. So in between the user interface and the data. Notice there's no arrows here between views and models. So in an MVC pattern, the data layer and the user interface layer never speak to each other directly. Everything is filtered and all the logic is done in the controller. So the controller, yeah, I mentioned, it parses it, it's the brains. And as Scott said, so there's this separation of concerns. So we're separating our user interface, our front end, from our data in the back end, and then all our logic sits in the middle. So Scott mentioned separation of concerns. So what are the, Attila, it holds the business logic, and it might also hold, input validation. That's right. So what are the benefits? Why would you want to split an application up into a presentation layer, a data layer, and a logic layer? There's a whole number of reasons why this pattern has become so popular. Can you think of what does this offer? It's easier to maintain. Yep, it can be confidential. Yep, we can protect our data. We can read the code more easily. Yeah, we can swap out components. Right, we can deploy the view. Let's say we build this as a web app, and then we go, hey, I now want to make this a mobile app. We can just build a set of mobile views, and it can use the same logic and data layers. What about working in a team environment? How is this helpful on a large project? Yep, Shisato, it's easy to manage. So what if you're working in a team? How could you do this? How would this structure help you? Yeah, that's right. We can say that exactly, Jesse. We say, our front-end designers, you guys only touch the views. We don't want you playing around in the models, our business classes, or our logic. Yep, we can decouple. That's right, Attila. We can move to microservice environment, right? So we can divide the work evenly. We can put on security rules about who can touch what. And testing and debugging also becomes so much easier, right? Let's look at a typical PHP file. So here's a PHP file. Let me just go and find a PHP file I built in class in winter semester. What did we build? Let's see. So here was my movies page where we listed a whole bunch of movies. So here's our code. We've got a bunch of HTML, so some PHP logic at the top. We're checking for a search. Then we've got a block of HTML code. Then we've got more server-side script, authentication check, database, writing an SQL query, generating it, printing out table tags, and then using a loop. So we've got logic, presentation, and data all mashed together in one. Yeah, so we can't divide the work. And if the page crashes, we don't know, is the problem in the presentation, the logic, or the data? It's a mess. So we want to separate out all of this stuff. So what does this look like in an MVC app? Well, I'll show you. So here, this is from last semester. So we built like this online store. We're going to build our own online store. So how does this work? So we have a page. We've got a view to display all the categories. So we have this HTML view. So here's what it looks like. We've got a little bit of server-side code, and then we basically just have HTML with a few server-side variables injected. There's no logic, there's no database connection, there's no SQL query, any of that. This is just the front-end code only. As Manjinder said, the you front-enders, you need to know your place. So here's your place, right? Here's the code. So there's our view. I need like it, Scott. Okay, so what about our model? So we can go in, we have a separate folder for models. Here's our categories class. Really simple, clean, looks just like the kind of class you would have worked with in Jarrett's class, right? We've got a name, if we're in the models namespace, we have a simple class with a couple a few properties defined. an ID that's an integer with a get and set, a name property with a string with a getter and setter, and a reference to a child object. One category is related to a list of many products. Again, nothing to do with our user interface, nothing to do with our view. This just represents the data, our category data in the database. So then the brains of the operation, we've got a categories controller, again in the controllers folder. And this neat structure, Visual Studio will build it all for us. We don't even have to create it. So what does our controller look like? We've got a bunch of references. I won't go through all the code. We've got a constructor that requires an instance of a database connection. And then we have this method here called index. This is the method, the logic, that loads the list of categories into the view we looked at. We've got a method called index. What happens here? It uses our database connection. It queries the categories model, fetches them as a list, and passes this data and loads the view. That's all the code. Right here, one line of code to fetch the data and hand it to the view. But all these things are separated into their own files. So we can divide the work, we can debug it, we can swap components in and out really easily. So how does this work I'll make this available. So how does this work at runtime in .NET? We'll also see what's this little dispatcher. So let's say we have a website, domain.com. Here's our URL. I'll throw it in the chat, but you can see it on my slide deck. From looking at that URL, one of the great things about ASP.NET is the URLs are friendly URLs. They're descriptive. What do you think would happen at this URL that we're looking at that you see in blue on my screen? What would happen at domain.com/orders/details/1000? You're going to get a login screen. Okay, Attila, yeah, it could be an API, but in this case, we're thinking about it as a web address on an actual web application. So an API typically just has the controller and model, but there's no front end, right? The front end is separate. In this case, we're including a view front end. Okay, so Jesse's suggesting, yeah, it should show the information, the details of order 1000. Yeah, it's essentially a method call. So Alex, close. Instead of showing the details of one product, right, it's showing us what was order 1000. So who was the customer, and yeah, what product did they buy? So the way that this works, so the client makes a request, right? They type this URL and they click on a link. Yeah. And the URL sends a set of instructions to the IIS web server, this dispatcher, and it parses the URL. So here's what it means. The first thing it does is it looks at the first section of the URL after the root domain name. And it knows that this request will be handled by the orders controller file, which will automatically be placed in the controllers folder. The second part of the URL is then, as Scott said, it's a method call. So it's going to look for a method called details. And then it's also going to pass in this parameter of 1000. So this method is then the controller is going to make a request to the order model and say, hey, go to the database and retrieve order 1000 and pass this object back here. And then what's the controller going to do? It's going to display a view that's in the views folder, orders folder, details. It's going to display that view, and it's also going to pass in this order object 1000 that comes out of the database via the model. So all of our URLs are very descriptive. They tell you exactly what's happening. So it's very well organized, but it means the naming conventions are important. So all of these things work by naming convention. So it's important we follow those conventions, and then the MVC architecture will do all this heavy lifting for us. We'll play around with it very shortly. So we've talked about a lot of the things. We can also reuse our components. So let's say we build a newsletter module in one application. If we build it with that MVC structure, we can easily take those components and add them to another application if we need to. We can reuse our code really easily because it's all modular. We'll come back to that. So let's go ahead and we're going to kind of make a throwaway project for today. Next week or the week after, we'll build a project that we're going to keep. But today, we're just going to kind of poke around at the structure and play around with MVC a bit. We don't really need to keep it. So I'm going to close my installer, and I'm going to open up Visual Studio. So I'm going to open up Visual Studio, and we're going to use the MVC web application template to see what we get. We're actually going to get a working website right out of the box. And then we can poke around in Visual Studio and look at things like the runtime debugger and some of the other tools that come with it. So once Visual Studio opens, we want to create a new project. Now there's lots of project templates. So I'm going to search for the template I want. So up here at the top, you've got this search box. If you type ASP.NET, I want this option that's highlighted, the very top. It's the ASP.NET. Actually, I'm sorry. I want this one down here. ASP.NET Core Web App Model View Controller. And make sure the language says C#. Okay, I'll type that in the chat, but you can see it highlighted on my screen. It's ASP.NET Core Web App Model View Controller in C#. So this is the template we're going to use. All the projects we build, we're going to use this template. You can also filter here. So if you want to filter down, you can choose C#. And all project types. If you filter down to web, so we want this one. ASP.NET Core Web App Model View Controller. And click Next. We will repeat this next week. Next week's project won't be a throwaway project. We're going to build one project next week, and then we're going to work with that project for all the rest of our lessons. So I'll just call this, you can call this whatever you want. This will be COMP2084 Lesson 1. Save it wherever you want. Again, we're not keeping this one. This is just kind of an experimental project. You should never have spaces in your project names. So just click Next. Your .NET framework should be at 5.0. If it's not for today, no big deal. If you've got 3 or 3.1, that's okay. Is there anybody who doesn't see .NET 5.0? You can use 3.1 for today. But if you don't see 5.0, you'll want to install the 5.0 SDK. Yeah, you may have 2 or 2.1 as well. 5 is good. If you don't see 5, you can get 5. I've put the link on Blackboard. I'll show you. You don't need it for right now. Just maybe before next week. So if you don't see .NET 5.0, under Weekly Learning and Tools and Resources, underneath the instructions about installing Visual Studio, here's the link for the .NET Core SDK. So if you open this up, you can download the .NET SDK 5.0. Again, you don't need to do this right now if you're missing it. No big deal. Just do it before the class next week. Now there's a couple options here I'm going to change. Number one, notice the authentication type, it defaults to none. I'm going to change this to individual accounts. This will allow us to store users in SQL Server. We're not going to do it today, but we should be in the habit of choosing this option. Because if you leave it as none, it's very difficult to add authentication later. Easier to do at the time you set up your project. Also not critical for today, but generally we should always configure for HTTPS. We'll talk about HTTPS later in the course when we get to our security module. But best practice, pick individual user accounts, configure for HTTPS and .NET 5. Don't stress about these options for today. They don't really affect what we're going to do today. And when you're done, just click the Create button. This will take a minute. And Microsoft is actually going to build us a working MVC app. So we'll let that run for a minute. So my project's created. And now if we look in Solution Explorer, you'll notice we actually have models, views, and controller folders already here. We'll look at a couple of these other files in a minute. Now, how do we view the site in the browser? Visual Studio comes with a built-in web server. Its production web server is called IIS, Internet Information Services. Visual Studio comes with IIS Express. So unlike in your PHP class where you had to install WAMP or XAMPP or MAMP separately to run a web server, you don't need to do that with .NET. Web server's right here. So the best way to start the server is actually here. There's a play button here, but I don't recommend using it. Yes, it is awesome, Alex, and we don't have to configure it or anything. You can press this button, but if you do, it starts the server in debug mode. So it does start it, but you can't make any changes to the project while the debugger's running. So the better way to start it, that's more efficient, is click on the debug menu and choose this option, or you can hit Control F5. Start without debugging. That launches the site, starts the web server, but the debugger isn't running, so we can still make changes to the code while the site is active. When you start debugging, you have to keep starting and stopping the server. It's not very efficient. I only use start debugging when I'm putting in a breakpoint in the code. Other than that, 99% of the time, I'm going to use start without debugging. Under the debug menu, make sure you expand it, Manjinder. It should be there. So here's what happens. When I try start without debugging, you'll notice in the output window, it says it's building, so it's compiling the site. And it says it's launching it on localhost, and I've got a port number here that starts with 443, which are the SSL ports. Okay, I will come back to you. Now I do get this. Yeah, Control F5. Yes, you may be getting this. Security risk. Why is it asking? Well, because we said we wanted a secure site with SSL. So if I click Advanced here, it says, oh, we don't like the certificate because it's self-signed. Like Visual Studio generated its own SSL. It's not from like a VeriSign or GoDaddy or official certificate issue. So I'm going to accept the risk and continue. I know this is safe. The browser doesn't recognize the SSL certificate. It's fine. So I won't see this warning again. So yeah, try Control F5 if you don't see the debug menu. And we actually have a working website with a couple pages here. We've got home. If I click privacy, notice the URL, /home/privacy. I can go back. We've got a shared header and footer. We even have register and login links. Oh, good. And we have pre-built templates to sign up, log in, and our site also includes Bootstrap and jQuery, so it's even mobile responsive, where we get our little drop-down menu. And the amount of code we have written is 0, not 1 character. Yeah, I bet, Alex, I agree. So this gives us a great place to start. We don't have to waste time building a nav bar, downloading Bootstrap, jQuery. I mean, if we don't want those things, we can get rid of them. We can, or there's also an empty template. But if we know we're going to want these things, this takes away so much of that work for us, and we can just customize it. So what's in here? Actually, you know what? It's 12:51. So before we go any farther, I've got my app running. Let's take a break here. I don't think we're going to need a full other, like we're not going to have to go right till 2 o'clock today or 1:50. But I want to just play around and make a few little changes, like add a couple pages and links, just so that you can get a feel for how MVC works. I mean, I've kind of given you the theory, but I do want to get our hands dirty just a little bit and build out a couple of views and add a couple methods so we can see how it works. Okay, so let's take a 10-minute break here. I will stop this recording. We'll come back at 1:02 and we'll do a quick tour of what's in the project, and we'll try and add a few pages and links to it. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording. I can try and help a couple people if it's not loading for you. And then I will need to take a quick break. Okay, so we'll come back in 10 minutes.